And according to Judge Prescott, Jeremy Hammond is looking at 37 years to life in prison for charges of hacking into Stratford.
As a journalist, the kind of crime that Jeremy Hammond is accused of is invaluable to bring transparency to what is otherwise a completely opaque and ever-pervasive national security state. In 2011, over 90 million documents were classified. 4 million people, both in government and in the private sector, have access to those classified information, and there is incredible profit to be made by increasing the national security state, not to mention incredible profit to be made with the constant erosion of civil liberties that we've seen in communities of color, at least since the 1980s, with the racist war on drugs, and have now been moved to Muslim communities and activist communities as well. With regards to Judge Prescott and her conflict of interest, this is it's obviously a conflict of interest. She should recuse herself, and not only was her husband personally affected by the hack, but Judge Prescott herself was also an associate at Cahill, Gordon, and Rindell, and so that's just further evidence of her lack of ability to be impartial in this case. Further, what we see here is symptomatic of a larger problem. The justice system is no longer a tool for accountability or for oversight. It's often a shield that protects the most powerful, and at the same time brings the hammer down on those who seek to resist it. And what we have here is just a symbol of what happens in federal courts all the time. It's just a little bit more obvious and toxic in this case than in normal cases. Further, the incentives for the government are to continue to classify material, to continue to keep things secret, and so much so that when I was in Guantanamo Bay covering the pretrial hearing of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, I heard the lead prosecutor argue that the 5 co-defendants' thoughts, experiences, and memories should be treated as presumptively classified. So we have now a situation where people's subjectivity is actually treated as classified, and the torture that those men were put through is the state has every interest in making sure that they are never allowed to talk about what happened, and it is only through non-traditional methods of seeking transparency that we learn what our government is doing. Leaks that appear in the newspaper are nearly always strategic. They're almost always in the interest of the leaker, of the administration, and so only through the kinds of means that Jeremy Hammond is accused of seeking transparency can we actually know what our government is doing in our name as citizens. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gideon Oliver. I'm the president of the National Lawyers Guild New York City chapter, and I have a brief statement that I'd like to read. Judge Prescott's refusal to release Jeremy Hammond on bail, purportedly because he's a flight risk or because he allegedly presents a danger to the community, is a symptom of the political nature of the government's prosecution of Jeremy. The denial of bail is the latest in a series of egregious failures of the state to uphold basic constitutional principles, clearly apparent in the political prosecutions of whistleblowers and liberators of information such as Jeremy, who should be applauded and supported, not vilified and punished before trial. As Jeremy's lawyers argued in his bail hearing last week, there are conditions under which he could be released, subject to court-directed and supervised restrictions on, for example, his ability to travel and his access to computers. In fact, the court regularly releases people accused of crimes far more serious than the crimes Jeremy is accused of committing under such conditions. Jeremy's no stranger to court supervision and complying with bail conditions. His continuing pretrial imprisonment will severely hamper his attorney's ability to prepare a defense and to defend Jeremy at trial. It's an expression of the ways in which, particularly in political cases such as Jeremy's, the state will go to any lengths to punish people who shed light on the state's and corporations' dirty laundry. Now comes the revelation that Chief Judge Preska's husband is among those the government would count as victims of the crimes Jeremy is alleged to have committed. Jeremy's legal team, I understand, will file a formal motion early next week asking Judge Preska to recuse herself, and we should all join in that request. Beyond that, I join in other supporters of Jeremy in calling on the state to take the Constitution and its promises of due process, the right to prepare and present a defense, and the free and full impartial administration of justice seriously, and in calling on Judge Preska to recuse herself in this case. That's it. Thank you.
Judge Preska has denied bond for Jeremy, and she refuses to recuse herself despite this blatant conflict of interest. We're calling on the people of New York, the people of the United States, to call into pressure to demand that Judge Loretta Preska recuse herself from this case so that Jeremy Hammond gets a shot at a fair trial. I have a statement from Chris Hedges. And again, this is by Chris Hedges. The security and surveillance state is creating a hermetically closed system of power. It is doing this by rewriting laws to subvert the Constitution and grant itself the ability to criminalize all forms of dissent. The FISA Amendment Act, the Authorization to Use Military Force Act, the Enhanced Terrorism Laws, and the Misuse of Espionage Act to silence whistleblowers, and the National Defense Authorization Act, Section 1021, which empowers the government to use the military to seize and detain U.S. citizens, strip citizens of due process, and hold them in indefinite detention, are chilling examples of a new America. An America where freedom and liberty have become a hollow cliche. Nearly all of the government's actions and decisions, many of which violate our most cherished civil liberties and defy the constitutional call for a separation of powers, are now effectively hidden from the public. These decisions are beyond scrutiny of the press or the judiciary. At the same time, we as citizens have no privacy left. The government has handed to itself the capacity to carry out the warrantless wiretapping, monitoring, and eavesdropping on tens of millions of citizens. Our personal data, correspondence, histories, employment records, private activities, phone logs, email exchanges, travel, and political views are stored in perpetuity in government supercomputers. We are the most monitored, spied on, photographed, listened to, and watched population in human history. Our security and surveillance state now dwarfs the cruder forms of internal control of past totalitarian states, from Nazi Germany to the Stasi state in East Germany to Stalin's Soviet Union. Anyone, including whistleblowers at the National Security Agency or the CIA, who attempts to bring to light government crimes, as we have seen with the Obama administration's use of the Espionage Act 6 times to silence dissidents within the system, is hounded, persecuted, and faces the possibility of long prison terms. Those who have the skills and capacity to electronically enter those closed systems of information terrify the state. They are treated not as criminals, but as terrorists. They are denied fair trials. They are imprisoned in conditions that can only be described as torture. They are subject to murky statutes and laws that make a mockery of democracy and have no place in open society. And the state, when it confronts those who have this capacity, uses everything at its disposal to destroy these opponents. We are not asking today for very much. We are asking for a fair hearing in a court of law. We are asking that Jeremy Hammond be permitted to present his case before a judge who does not have a personal involvement in his alleged activities, a personal involvement that will clearly prejudice the outcome. Hammond has enough stacked against him already. He at least deserves a chance at justice. It is a sad commentary on U.S. society that we, the dissidents, who call for the rule of law while the power elites and the organs of the state distort and subvert the rule of law. Our society has been turned upside down. We need to resist in every way possible this gross inversion of democracy, not only for Hammond, but for ourselves. And that was by Chris Hedges. Thank you.
I'd first like to read a statement from one of the Bhopal activists, Shrikant Sarangi. Just came in. The leaked Stratfor emails are telling in that, despite repeated assertions that it has no outstanding liability for Bhopal, the corporate giant Dow Chemical decided to hire the intelligence and surveillance company Stratfor to spy on and monitor Bhopal activists from 2004 to 2011. In fact, as late as March, Dow CEO Andrew Liveris argued that ongoing outrage about Bhopal absolutely did not pose a threat to Dow. But if, as Dow holds, Bhopal is a non-issue and all grievances are settled, why did Dow enlist Stratfor to, for example, gather information about the current and former staff of the ICJB, the International Committee for Justice in Bhopal, document the ICJB's online activity, as well as that of UK-based Bhopal Medical Appeal, and report events and programs held by the Yes Men? The global outcry over Dow's sponsorship of the 2012 Summer Olympics and subsequent public relations fiasco confirmed that, on the contrary, the issue of Bhopal remains more important than ever. If anything, the leaks show that however much Dow tries to downplay Bhopal in public, behind closed doors it is very much concerned about it. And this is our statement from the Yes Men. Whoever is responsible for the leak of the Stratfor emails, I want to thank him from the bottom of my heart, or her. Whoever released them performed a function that's an integral part of democracy, as surely as voting or running for public office. Whether it's through civil disobedience or investigative reporting, which this is sort of in between, exposing evil doing is indeed an integral part of democracy that we utterly depend on. There are many ways to expose evil doing and fight against it. In Bhopal, a number of folks have been doing it for 28 years, ever since a chemical plant exploded in their city exploded in 1984, killing 3,000 people in one night and 20,000 more across the years. Their main target is the Dow Chemical Company, the company ultimately responsible for the disaster. To try to hold Dow accountable, the activists there have gone on hunger strikes, marches from Bhopal to Delhi, and so on. They've had a lot of success getting attention for it in India, and have recently gotten the Indian government to make concessions and promise to clean up the site. Their real target is Dow, and since Dow has no legal recourse against these activists and can't stop them, they've spent a whole lot of money to hire Stratfor to spy on their victims in Bhopal to find out what moves their victims might make next. No one would have found out about this sick situation if there hadn't been this leak of millions of emails of which Jeremy is accused. Whoever did this leak exposed a lot of other corporate wrongdoing too. Stratfor was also spying on Occupy, PETA, WikiLeaks, Anonymous, and the Yes Men. Yes, us. They were spying on us because in 2004 we joined the Bhopal activists in trying to shame Dow into providing redress for the 1984 disaster. We set up a fake Dow website and got ourselves invited by the BBC to speak on the 20th anniversary of the disaster as Dow. And we announced to the world that Dow was going to compensate the victims, clean up the site, and basically do everything that Dow should. The world loved this announcement, though the market punished Dow by cutting billions off its share price. There was an enormous amount of press and millions of people found out about Dow's responsibility for the world's biggest industrial disaster. Now publicly Dow said nothing about this, nothing. And privately they paid Stratfor probably hundreds of thousands of dollars at least to spy on us. That's very sinister, but it's also very flattering. It means that Dow and other companies see us and the Bhopal victims and Occupy as a threat that can actually change things, which it can, maybe not with each action, but cumulatively. Thanks to activists in Bhopal and the Occupy movement, and the millions of activists who are fighting in their own ways to bring evildoers to their knees, slowly but surely, inexorably, all these people are bringing democracy to America. We, Yes Men, learned this when we joined up and participated in the Occupy movement, who Stratfor also spied on. And we discovered that all the activism that sometimes seems pointless actually does have a great effect. The Occupy movement, for example, itself the product of so much activism before it, profoundly shaped the presidential election and continues to have even profounder effects. The bad guys know this, and they should also know that as long as companies like Dow fight people, people will fight back. And as long as companies like Stratfor fight in extra-legal, unethical ways to keep tabs on those fighting for positive change, they can expect to be brought down again and again and again, no matter how hard they try to put the lid on it, no matter who they try to put in jail. Democratic action is inexorable, and it won't stop.
Thanks.